I knew something wasn't right the moment I felt the stabbing pain in my side. It started as a dull ache earlier in the day, something I brushed off while I handled Grace's breakfast and prepped her for school. But by the afternoon, it became unbearable. I collapsed on the cold kitchen floor, clutching my side, the sharp waves of pain radiating through me. It felt like a knife twisting inside, and as much as I tried to mask it, I knew Grace, my 7-year-old daughter, could see through me. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, her tiny voice trembling as she stood a few feet away, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't dare move closer. Perhaps my Wes scared her. I tried to reassure her, putting on the strongest voice I could muster, though it barely came out above a whisper. "I'll be okay, Grace. Just a little stomach ache." My words were a lie. Of course, whatever this was, it wasn't just a simple stomach ache. I was in agony, and the cold sweat beat in on my forehead wasn't helping. I needed help. Amelia's footsteps echoed from down the hall. I felt a brief spark of hope. My wife would see me in this state and surely take action. She stepped into the kitchen, her sleek suitcase rolling behind her. She looked ready for her trip with her brother Daniel. Her hair perfectly styled her expression, showing not concern, but annoyance. "What are you doing on the floor, Marcus?" she asked, her voice sharp, as if my crumpled form had somehow inconvenienced her. The pain made it hard to speak, but I managed to gasp out, "I think it's appendicitis. It's bad. I need to go to the hospital." Her response was a scoff. "Appendicitis? You're being dramatic. It's probably just indigestion. Why don't you rest for a bit? You'll feel better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did she not see me clutching my side, barely able to breathe through the waves of pain? "Amelia, please. I'm serious. I can't move. Grace is here. I need you." She glanced at her, watched the faintest flicker of impatience crossing her face. "Marcus, I don't have time for this. I can't miss my flight with Daniel. Just call Olivia or something. You'll figure it out with that." She rolled her suitcase out of the kitchen and out of the house, leaving me there on the floor, with Grace standing by, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, don't be sick," she whimpered, finally rushing to my side and taking my hand in her small one. Her touch brought me comfort, but it also fueled my desperation. I couldn't let her see me like this for long. I had to do something. I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands, scrolling through my contacts until I found Olivia's name. My sister had always been there for me, and now I had no choice but to lean on her again. When she picked up, her voice was a mix of confusion and concern. "Marcus, what's going on, Olivia?" I rasped, the effort to speak draining me. "I think it's appendicitis. I can't move and Grace is terrified. Amelia..." She left. "I need help." There was a brief silence on the other end before her voice came back, steady and firm. "Stay right there. I'm coming now. Just hold on." The relief I felt at her words was immense, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of anger and hurt. Amelia had abandoned me when I needed her the most. The woman I thought would always be my partner, my support, had chosen her trip over me, over Grace. As I leaned back against the cold tile, clutching Grace's hand while we waited for Olivia, one thing became clear. This wasn't something I could just forget or forgive. Amelia's decision to leave me in this state spoke louder than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't just about the pain in my side anymore. It was about the fracture in our marriage when I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. When Olivia arrived minutes later, rushing in and helping me to my feet, I felt a surge of gratitude for her. but even as she helped me into her car and drove us to the hospital, I couldn't shake the bitter truth Amelia's actions had revealed. I couldn't rely on her when it truly mattered, and that realization was a wound deeper than anything happening in my body. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the sterile white walls and listening to the rhythmic beeping of the machines, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because the surgery had been successful. My appendix had been on the verge of rupturing. The doctor said if I had waited any longer, the situation could have been life-threatening. And anger because the person who should have been there for me, who should have rushed me to the hospital herself, wasn't. Amelia hadn't called not once, not even to check if I was alive. My sister Olivia had stepped up without hesitation. She'd driven me to the hospital, stayed with Grace until my parents arrived, and even updated them on my condition while I was in surgery. She did everything Amelia should have done, but didn't. When I woke up, Olivia was there by my side, looking worried but relieved to see me awake. "You scared us, Marcus," she said softly, her hand resting on mine. I smiled weakly, the effort exhausting. "Thanks for being here. Olivia, I don't know what I would have done without you." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't thank me. This is what family does, I don't understand why Amelia didn't stay. I mean, Marcus, this is serious. You could have." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Never mind." Her words hung in the air long after she left the room. I knew what she wanted to say. I've been thinking it myself. Amelia's absence wasn't just a moment of poor judgment. It was a betrayal. A betrayal of the vows we took, of the promises we made to always stand by each other. The doctor came in later to check on me, explaining how close I'd come to a major emergency. I nodded along, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was stuck on Amelia. I replayed the moment in the kitchen, over and over, her dismissive words like daggers in my chest. When my parents arrived with Grace, her face lit up the moment she saw me. She ran to my bedside, climbing up carefully so she could sit beside me. "Daddy, are you all better now?" she asked, her little hands gripping mine tightly. I pulled her into a hug, holding her as tightly as I could manage. "I'm getting there, sweetheart. I'll be okay." Her presence was comforting, but it also reminded me of the responsibility I had. I couldn't let her grow up in an environment where she learned that neglect and indifference were acceptable. My parents stayed quiet, but their faces spoke volumes. My mom, always so reserved, looked like she wanted to say something. My dad, on the other hand, was fuming. "Marcus, where's Amelia? Why isn't she here?" He finally asked, his voice low and controlled, though I could sense the anger simmering beneath. I hesitated. "She's away on a trip with Daniel." That was all it took for my dad to explode. "A trip while you're in the hospital." "Does she even know how close you came to Dad, please?" I interrupted, not wanting Grace to hear the argument brewing. "Let's not do this now." He looked like he wanted to argue, but my mom placed a hand on his arm, silently urging him to back down. The next few days were quiet. My parents took care of Grace while I recovered, and Olivia visited often to make sure I was okay. Amelia? Nothing. No calls, no texts, not a single sign of concern. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some reason for her behavior. Maybe she was overwhelmed or didn't understand how serious my condition was. But deep down, I knew the truth. She had made a choice that day, a choice to leave me and Grace behind for her own convenience by the time I was discharged and back. Home. The physical pain had dulled, but the emotional wound remained raw. Seeing Grace's face light up when I walked through the door was the only thing that made me smile. "Daddy, you're back," she cried, running into my arms. "You're not sick anymore, right?" "I'm much better now," I said, holding her close. But even as I said it, I knew that better was a relative term. Physically, I was healing. Emotionally, I was unraveling. Amelia's absence during my time of need wasn't something I could just shrug off. It had left a mark, a deep cut that I couldn't ignore. As I tucked Grace into bed that night, I sat by her side, stroking her hair as she drifted off to sleep. I thought about the promises I had made to Amelia when we got married, about the family we were supposed to be building together. And then I thought about her suitcase rolling out of the kitchen, her dismissive words echoing in my ears. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But one thing was clear. Something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, half supported, half loved. Amelia had made her choice. Now I had to figure out mine. By the time Amelia returned from her trip, I thought I had prepared myself for the converse we were about to have. I thought I'd work through the anger and disappointment. But the moment the front door banged open and her voice filled the house, all those emotions came flooding back. "Marcus, why didn't you pick us up yesterday? Daniel and I had to spend extra on a taxi and train fares." She yelled her frustration, echoing down the hall. I was in the living room with Grace, helping her color a picture she'd been working on. Amelia stormed in her suitcase, trailing behind her, Daniel right on her heels. Both of them looked indignant, as if I'd somehow wronged them. I stood up slowly, my body still recovering from the surgery. "Welcome back," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Must have been a tough trip." Amelia stopped in her tracks, her expression shifting to surprise at the tone in my voice. "What's with the attitude?" she demanded. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "Attitude, Amelia? While you were off enjoying your trip, I was in the hospital. I nearly died." My voice was calm, but the anger simmered just below the surface. Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered, brushing me off with a wave of her hand. "You're fine now, though, right? It couldn't have been that serious." I felt something snap inside me. Not that serious. My appendix was about to rupture. "Amelia, if it weren't for Olivia, I don't even know if I'd still be here. And where were you on a trip with your brother, acting like I don't even exist?" Daniel, usually so smug and confident, shifted uncomfortably. "Hey man, don't bring me into this. I didn't know anything about." I cut him off with a glare. "You didn't know, because she didn't care enough to tell you. You both abandoned me when I needed you the most." Amelia's face reddened. "You're being dramatic. You always make a big deal out of nothing." Before I could respond, the front door opened again. I turned to see Olivia walking in with my parents and Amelia's parents right behind her. I'd called them earlier explaining everything, and they had all agreed to come. Now, as they filed into the room, the air grew heavy with tension. "What's everyone doing here?" Amelia asked, her voice faltering slightly as she took in the stern expressions on their faces. My dad was the first to speak. "We're here because Marcus told us what happened." "Amelia, how could you leave him like that? How could you leave your husband and your daughter alone when he was in so much pain?" Amelia looked around, clearly taken aback by the collective disappointment directed at her. I didn't know it was that serious," she said weakly. "That's not an excuse." Olivia snapped her voice sharp. "You didn't even bother to check. You just left. And let's not pretend this is the first time you've put your own plans above your family." Daniel, who had been trying to stay out of the conversation, finally spoke, woke up. Look, maybe she made a mistake, but it's not like Marcus was dying enough. My mom said firmly, cutting him off. This isn't just about what happened this time. It's about a pattern of behavior. Amelia, you've been putting Marcus and Grace last for a long time now, and we tired of watching it. Amelia's parents, who had been silent until now, looked at their daughter with a mix of sadness and disappointment. Amelia, her mother began, we raised you to take care of your family, to be there for them. What you did, it's not right. Amelia crossed her arms defensively, her gaze darting between everyone in the room. So what, you're all just going to gang up on me now? I made a mistake. Okay, it's not the end of the world. It is for me, I said quietly but firmly. The room fell silent as I met her gaze. Because this isn't just about one mistake. It's about every time I've had to pick up the pieces while you prioritized your own wants over our family. It's about the fact that I can't trust you to be there when it really matters. Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. Out for once. She didn't have a quick retort or a dismissive comment. She just stood there staring at me as the weight of my words sank in. The silence was broken by my dad, who turned to Amelia's parents. You should talk to your daughter, because if something doesn't change, I don't see how this marriage can survive. With that, the meeting ended one by one. Everyone left their disappointment hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Amelia didn't say a word as she walked to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Daniel muttered something about heading home and left without another word. I sat back down with Grace, who had been quietly watching from the couch. She climbed into my lap and wrapped her arms around me. It's okay, Daddy, she whispered. I'm here. And in that moment, I realized she was the only person I could count on. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. Amelia's actions had pushed us to the edge, and now it was up to me to decide what came next. The days after the confrontation felt like walking through a fog. Amelia tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the silence between us was thick and oppressive. She avoided me, which was fine. I didn't have much to say to her. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. I spent my time reflecting, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head. I thought about the times. I had been there for her without hesitation, supporting her through every challenge, big or small. And then I thought about how she had walked out on me, dismissing my pain as if it were nothing, leaving Grace and me to fend for ourselves. It wasn't just one moment of neglect. It was the culmination of years of feeling like I came second or even third to her wants and her brother's demands. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a partnership in name only. One evening, as Grace was asleep and the house was quiet, I sat at the dining table with a folder in front of me. Inside were the divorce papers I had picked up earlier that day. I hadn't told anyone yet, not my parents, not Olivia, because I needed to be certain. Amelia walked into the room, her phone in hand, scrolling, as if she didn't have a care in the world. When she saw me sitting there, she paused. What's with the foose face, Marcus? I looked up at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I had rehearsed this moment in my head, but now that it was here, I felt a lump forming in my throat. Still, I pushed through. We need to talk. She sighed dramatically, setting her phone down on the counter. What now, can't we? Just move on from all this. I slid the folder across the table toward her. No, Amelia, we can't just move on. I've thought about this, and I can't do it anymore. I want a divorce. For a moment, her face froze in disbelief. Then she let out a laugh, cold, harsh and mocking. A divorce. Don't be ridiculous, Marcus. You're overreacting. You always do. I leaned forward, my hands resting on the table to steady myself. This isn't an overreaction, Amelia. This is me finally standing up for myself and for Grace. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, and they're not with us. I can't keep living like this. Her expression shifted anger, replacing the mockery. Oh, so you think you can manage without me? Do you have any idea how hard it'll be out there? You're not exactly rolling in money, Marcus. Her words were meant to wound, but I didn't flinch. I had anticipated this. I'd rather struggle every day than spend another moment feeling invisible in my own marriage. At least I'll know I'm doing it for Grace, not for someone who doesn't care. Amelia's eyes narrowed, her face twisting into a sneer. Fine, go ahead. Divorce me. Let's see how well you do on your own. Don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you've made. Her arrogance only solidified my decision. This isn't a mistake. Amelia. Staying would be the mistake. And for the record, I'm not crawling back. Not now. Not ever. She stormed out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed at the table for a long time, staring at the papers in front of me. Part of me felt relief. Finally, I was taking control of my life. But another part of me felt a deep sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned my marriage ending, but it was the reality I had to face. The next morning, I filed the paperwork. It wasn't an easy process, but each signature, each document felt like a step forward. My parents and Olivia were supportive, though I could see the sadness in their eyes. They had hoped for reconciliation, but they also understood why it wasn't possible. Amelia, on the other hand, was livid. She alternated between ignoring me completely and throwing snide comments my way whenever we crossed paths. You think you're so noble, don't you? She hissed one evening as I was helping Grace with her homework. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My actions spoke louder than any argument we could have. For the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming my life. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and fear. But deep down, I knew I was doing the right thing. This wasn't just about me. It was about Grace. She deserved to grow up in a home where love and respect were the foundations, not resentment and neglect. Amelia had made her choice, and now I was making mine. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally breathe, finally hope, and finally be the father Grace deserved. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it one step at a time. Filing for divorce was one thing, dealing with the aftermath was something else entirely. The process itself was grueling, not just because of the legalities, but because of Aya's relentless efforts to undermine me. She wasn't just angry. She was determined to make me regret my decision, and she wasn't pulling any punches. At first, she played the victim, painting me as the unreasonable one. Marcus just decided he couldn't handle being a husband anymore, she told our mutual friends, conveniently leaving out the part where she left me on the kitchen floor in agony. Some of them believed her, others didn't. But I couldn't afford to waste energy defending myself. My focus had to stay on Grace and our future. Amelia's tactics escalated quickly. She became dismissive during mediation meetings, shrugging off agreements and refusing to compromise on anything I want the house. She declared during one of the first sessions, her tone cold and final. You can find somewhere else to live. I didn't argue I wasn't about to fight for a house that no longer felt like a home. My priority was ensuring stability for Grace, not clinging to material things that had lost their meaning. But her next move was harder to stomach. "You're not fit to have full custody," Amelia announced during another meeting, her words sharp and calculated. "You can barely manage on your own, and Grace needs consistency." Her audacity stunned me. The same woman who had left me to fend for myself during a medical emergency was now questioning my ability to care for our daughter, Amelia. I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "Grace needs someone who puts her first. That's never been you." The mediator tried to keep things civil, but it was clear that Amelia wasn't interested in resolution. She wanted to punish me. Every comment, every demand was designed to push me to my breaking point, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I leaned on the support system. I'd always had my parents, Olivia, and even a few close friends who saw through Amelia's facade. Olivia became my rock during this time, helping me navigate the legal maze and reminding me of why I was doing this. "Don't let her wear you down," she said one evening as we worked through paperwork at my kitchen table. "You're stronger than she thinks." I clung to those words. During the hardest moments like the day, Amelia decided to involve Grace. "Daddy wants to take you away from me," she told, her tears streaming down her face in a performance worthy of an Oscar. Grace, confused and scared, came to me later that evening. "Daddy, is that true? Do you want me to live with you and not Mommy kneeling in front of her?" I held her hands and looked into her wide, innocent eyes. "Sweetheart, I want you to be happy and safe. That's all I've ever wanted. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." It wasn't easy watching Grace try to make sense of the situation, but I knew I had to remain patient and steady for her sake. The divorce wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about creating a healthier, more stable life for my daughter. As the weeks turned into months, Amelia's facade began to crack. Her arrogance gave way of frustration as she realized I wasn't backing down. The community started to take notice too. Stories of her neglect and selfishness began to circulate, thanks to Olivia and a few well-placed conversations. Amelia had always cared about appearances, and now those appearances were crumbling. Despite everything, I stayed focused on moving forward. I found a smaller, cozier place for Grace and me, a rental that felt more like a fresh start than the house ever had. I also began building a routine that gave Grace the consistency she needed: school, drop-offs, homework session, bedtime stories. These small moments became the foundation of our new life, a reminder of what I was fighting for. The legal process was exhausting, but each step felt like progress. Every signed document, every agreement reached, brought me closer to freedom. Amelia's attempts to intimidate me no longer had the power they once did. I could see her for who she really was, a woman desperate to control a situation that was slipping through her fingers. One day, during yet another heated meeting, Amelia leaned across the table and sneered. "You think you're winning, don't you? You think you're so noble, but let me tell you something, Marcus. You'll regret this. You're nothing without me." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I met her gaze and replied, "I'd rather struggle every day than spend another moment in a marriage where I feel invisible. This isn't about winning, Amelia. It's about doing what's right for Grace and me." For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or the realization that she couldn't control me anymore. Whatever it was, it didn't last long. She quickly masked it with a scoff and leaned back in her chair. But I knew I'd struck a nerve. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, but I could feel the tide shifting. I was no longer the man who lay on the kitchen floor, desperate and powerless. I was reclaiming my life, one hard-fought step at a time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking towards something better. The shift in Amelia's demeanor was subtle. At first, small cracks in her confidence that were easy to miss. But as the weeks went by, those cracks widened, revealing the person beneath the polished facade. The community, our friends, and even her workplace were starting to see her for who she truly was. And she didn't like it. Word of our divorce had spread faster than I expected, Ed, though I wasn't surprised. People love gossip, and a divorce is always a hot topic. Olivia had been instrumental in setting the record straight whenever Amelia tried to twist the narrative. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told anyone who asked how Amelia had abandoned me during a medical emergency and prioritized her own trip over her family. At first, Amelia brushed it off, convinced she could charm her way out of the situation. She'd been good at that for years, winning people over with her wit and charisma. But this time it wasn't working. Her colleagues began to notice her irritability and short temper. Friends who once admired her started distancing themselves, their smiles becoming polite but strained. Amelia's brother Daniel wasn't faring much better. The two of them had always been thick as thieves, but even their bond was showing signs of strain. One evening, while picking Grace up from a play date, I overheard them arguing outside his apartment. "You're the reason. Everything's falling apart." Daniel shouted, his voice loud enough for the entire block to hear. "Oh, don't you dare blame me," Amelia snapped back. "You were there too. Don't act like you're innocent in all this." The sound of their voices rising and falling was oddly satisfying. For years they'd been a united front, always putting their plans and priorities above mine. Now they were tearing each other apart. At the same time, Amelia's professional life was unraveling. She'd always been proud of her job, boasting about her achievements and her ability to balance work and family. But the truth was her neglectful behavior at home was starting to bleed into her work. Deadlines were missed, meetings were forgotten, and her once impeccable reputation began to crumble. One of her colleagues, who happened to be an old friend of mine, confided in me over coffee one afternoon. "Marcus, I don't know what's going on with Amelia, but she's not the same person she used to be. People are starting to talk. It's not good." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed felt like vindication. Amelia had built her identity around being successful and admired, but now that image was falling apart. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. Grace and I settled into our new routine, and, though it wasn't always easy, there was a sense of peace in our home that hadn't been there in years. Grace seemed happier too, her laughter more frequent, her smiles brighter. One day, while dropping her off at school, I noticed a group of parents whispering nearby. I caught snippets of their conversation. My name, Amelia's name, words like abandoned and divorce. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked Grace to her classroom. It stung, but not as much as I thought it would let them talk. I told myself they didn't know the full story, and even if they did, their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was Grace and the life I was building for us. Amelia, on the other hand, wasn't handling the judgment as well. She'd always cared deeply about what people thought of her, and now she couldn't escape the whispers and side glances. Her once loyal friends were avoiding her, and even her parents seemed distant. One evening, while Grace was at Olivia's house, I drove past Amelia's place and saw her and Daniel arguing again, this time in the driveway. Their voice vows were muffled, but their body language said it. All accusations, frustration, blame. The two people who had once been so united were now at each other's throats, each trying to shift responsibility for the mess they created. The following week, I heard through the grapevine that Amelia had been demoted at work. Her boss had apparently grown tired of her declining performance and decided it was time for a change. For someone like Amelia, whose identity was so tied to her career, it was a devastating blow. I didn't feel sorry for her, not anymore. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. The final nail in the coffin came during a school event. Grace's teacher had invited parents to join a small celebration in the classroom. Amelia showed. Up late, looking frazzled and out of place when she tried to engage with the other parents. They offered her polite smiles, but quickly moved on. I stood near the back watching as she realized the warmth and admiration she'd once received were gone. She caught my eye, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. But I didn't look away. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the same man she had dismissed and belittled as Grace and I walked out together. She hugged my leg and looked up at me. "Daddy, I'm glad you were here," she said with a bright smile. "I'll always be here, sweetheart," I replied, lifting her into my arms. Amelia had spent years tearing me down, but now she was the one crumbling. And though I wasn't one to celebrate someone's downfall, I couldn't deny the sense of justice in seeing her finally face the consequences of her actions. She had made her choices, and now so had I. The first morning in our new place felt surreal. The house was smaller, cozier, but it already felt more like a home than the one I'd left behind. Grace was still asleep, curled up in her new bed, while I stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee and looking around. The silence was different here, not oppressive like before, but peaceful. It was the sound of a fresh start. Rebuilding my life after the divorce wasn't easy. I had to let go of the anger, the resentment, and the frustration that had built up over the years. I had to focus on what mattered most. Grace. She was my anchor, the one constant in all this chaos, and I was determined to give her the stability she deserved. The first big step was finding a job. I'd been out of the workforce for years, relying on Amelia's income while I focused on raising Grace. Now I had to step up. My resume wasn't exactly impressive. It had gaps that couldn't be ignored, but I was willing to work hard and prove myself. After weeks of searching and countless interviews, I landed a position at a small accounting firm. The owner, Clara, was a single mother herself, and she understood the challenges I was facing. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said during my final interview. "You'll find your rhythm, and we'll be here to support you." The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady and the environment was welcoming. I worked hard, learning as much as I could, and over time I started to feel confident again. I wasn't just surviving. I was building something meaningful for Grace and me. Grace, for her part, adapted quicker than I expected. She loved our new neighborhood, especially the park just a block away. She made friends easily, her laughter filling the air as she played on the swings or chased butterflies. Seeing her happy reminded me why I was doing all this. One evening, as we sat on the living room floor eating pizza, Grace looked up at me and said, "Daddy, I like it here. It feels like home." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I'm glad, sweetheart. This is our home now." Of course, not everything was perfect. The whispers and gossip in the community hadn't stopped. At school drop-offs and pickups, I could feel the judgmental stares and hear the hushed conversations. "That's Marcus," they'd say. "You know, the one who got divorced. His wife left him." It hurt, but I refused to let it affect me. Grace needed me to be strong, and I wasn't about to let small-minded people bring me down. Olivia, as always, was my biggest cheerleader. She'd call me after hearing some new rumor and laugh it off. Let them talk. She'd say you're doing great. And that's all that matters. Amelia's downfall continued, though I tried not to dwell on it. I heard from mutual acquaintances that her workplace had demoted her and she was struggling to maintain the lifestyle she'd once flaunted. Daniel had distanced himself from her, and even her parents were less involved in her life. She was becoming a shadow of the person she once was. One day, while picking Grace up from school, Amelia showed up. She looked worn out, her usual polished appearance replaced with tired eyes and a forced smile. Grace ran to me first, hugging me tightly before turning to her mother. "Hi, Mommy," she said hesitantly. Amelia knelt down and hugged her, but the interaction felt strained. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Marcus, can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded, stepping to the side while Grace played nearby. "What's on your mind?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, looking down at her hands. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry for everything." The words caught me off guard. Amelia wasn't one to admit fault, let alone apologize. But as much as I wanted to hear those words years ago now, they felt hollow, too little, too late. I appreciate that I said my voice steady, but things are different now. Grace and I are moving forward, and I need to focus on that. She nodded, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand," as she walked away. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and closure. For the first time, I truly felt like I was leaving the past behind in the weeks that followed. Life settled into a new rhythm. Work became more fulfilling as I grew in my role and Grace thrived in her new environment. Our home was filled with laughter and love, a stark contrast to the tension and neglect we left behind. One evening, as I sat by the window watching Grace play in the yard, I reflected on how far we'd come. The road had been tough, filled with pain and uncertainty, but it had led us here a place of peace and hope. I wasn't the same man I'd been when this journey began. I was stronger, more confident, and finally free to build the life Grace and I deserved. Rebuilding a life from the ground up isn't easy, but it's worth it. And as I watched Grace's laughter, the air, I knew I'd made the right choice. We were finally home. The quiet of the evening was something I hadn't realized. I missed until it became a regular part of my life. Grace was asleep in her room, her soft breathing the only sound in the house. I sat by the window, a cup of coffee in my hands, staring out at the stars. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and change. But sitting there in the stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. I thought back to where it all started. The cold kitchen floor, the pain ripping through my body, and the realization that Amelia wasn't coming back to help me. That moment had been a wake-up call, forcing me to see the truth I'd been ignoring for years. Our marriage had been crumbling for a long time, but I convinced myself that things would get better. They never did. It wasn't just about Amelia leaving me in that moment of need. It was about the countless other times she prioritized herself, her brother, or her career over our family. It was about the dismissive remarks, the indifference, and the way I always felt like an afterthought. I had spent so much time trying to hold everything together that I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost in the process. But now, sitting here in this small, cozy home with Grace sleeping peacefully in the next room, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the man who had begged for scraps of attention or understanding. I wasn't the man who had settled for being invisible in his own marriage. I was someone new, someone stronger. The road to this point hadn't been easy. The divorce proceedings had been brutal, with Amelia fighting me every step of the way. She had tried to tear me down, questioning my ability to parent Grace, mocking my decision to leave her, and spreading lies to anyone who would listen. But through it all, I held firm. Not because it was easy, but because I knew what I was fighting for. A better life for Grace and me. And now, here we were living that better life. It wasn't perfect. There were still whispers and judgment from the community, and there were days when the weight of it all felt like too much. But every time I saw Grace's smile, heard her laugh, or watched her thrive in our new environment, I knew I'd made the right choice. Reflecting on Amelia's downfall, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. She had always been so sure of herself, so convinced that she was untouchable. But the cracks in her facade had been exposed, and now she was the one struggling to keep up appearances. I didn't revel in her pain, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing her face the consequences of her actions. Still, this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about Grace, and about the life we were building together. I thought about all the little victories we'd had in the past few months. Grace making new friends at school, my first paycheck for my new job, the nights we spent curled up on the couch watching movies. These moments, as small as they seemed, were everything. They were proof that we could move forward, that we could find happiness and stability on our own. As I sat there, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. For Olivia, who had been my rock through all of this. For my parents, who had stepped in when I needed them the most. For Grace, whose resilience and joy reminded me of why I was fighting so hard. And even for myself for finding the strength to leave a toxic situation and start over. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. If I could survive everything I'd been through, Amelia's betrayal, the grueling divorce, the whispers, and judgment, I could handle whatever came next. The sound of Grace stirring in her room pulled me out of my thoughts. I set my coffee cup down and walked to her door, peeing inside. She was still asleep, her face peaceful and her tiny hand clutching the edge of her blanket. I smiled, my heart swelling with love and determination. This was what mattered, not the past, not the whispers, not Amelia's attempts to tear me down. Grace was my priority, and everything I did from here on out would be for her. She deserved a father who was present, loving, and strong, and I was determined to be that father. As I turned off the light and closed her door, I felt a sense of closure the chapter. With Amelia was over and a new one was beginning. It was a chapter one would write on my own terms, filled with hope, love, and resilience. The road ahead might still have challenges, but I was ready to face them. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. And this time, I was determined to make it a good one. It started with a knock at the door late one afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Grace was at Olivia's house for the weekend, giving me a rare moment of peace. I opened the door, and there she was, Amelia. For a moment, I was stunned. She looked nothing like the woman I had once married. Her usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and tired eyes. "Marcus," she began, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to close the door in her face and be done with it. But another part of me, The part that once loved her, wanted to hear her out. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. Amelia walked into the living room, glancing around as if seeing it for the first time. The simplicity of the space seemed to throw her off, but I didn't offer any explanation. I stayed standing, waiting for her to speak. She finally turned to face me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. She started, her voice trembling slightly, and I realized I owe you an apology for everything. I crossed my arms, keeping my expression neutral. What exactly are you apologizing for, Amelia? She swallowed hard, looking down at the floor, for abandoning you when you needed me, for not being the wife or partner you deserved, for putting my own needs first. I was selfish, Marcus, and I see that now. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the impact she probably thought they would. Months ago, I might have clung to them, desperate for her to finally acknowledge the pain she caused. But now they felt hollow. Too late, too rehearsed. Why now? I asked, my tone steady. Why are you apologizing now, Amelia? Because you've truly changed, or because you've realized the life you built is falling apart? She flinched my words, clearly hitting their mark. It's not like that, she said quickly, but the hesitation in her voice betrayed her. I miss us. I miss what we had. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. What we had, Amelia? We haven't had anything real in years. You made sure of that every time you dismissed me, every time you put yourself and Daniel above Grace and me. She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. I know I messed up, Marcus, but I want to make things right for Grace. For us. I could feel my anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. Make things right. I repeated, Amelia, you can't just walk back into my life and expect everything to go back to the way it was. You didn't just mess up, you broke something, and I've spent the last few months picking up the pieces and building something better for Grace and me. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel the sympathy I once would have. I know I don't deserve for forgiveness, she said, her voice cracking. But I'm asking for another chance. Please, Marcus, for a moment. I considered her words, not because I wanted to take her back, but because I wanted to be sure of my decision. This was a woman I had once loved, the mother of my child. But as I stood there staring at her tear-strewn face, I realized that whatever love I had for her was gone. It had been replaced by something stronger. Self-respect. I'm sorry, Amelia. I said, my voice firm but not unkind. But I've moved on, Grace, and I have found a life that works for us. And I'm not willing to jeopardize that you made your choices, and now I'm making mine. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she seemed to accept that she wasn't going to get the response she wanted. I understand, she whispered, wiping at her eyes. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything. Thank you, I said simply. I hope you can find peace with yourself, Amelia. But this is the end of the road for us. She nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on me for a moment before she turned and walked out the door. I closed it behind her, leaning against it for a moment as I took a deep breath. The emotions were there. Anger, sadness, even a small flicker of pity. But they didn't consume me. Instead, I felt a sense of closure. This chapter of my life, with all its pain and heartache, was finally over. When Grace came home later that evening, her laughter filled the house as she told me about the adventures she had with Olivia. I listened intently, my heart full, as I realized just how far we had come. Amelia's attempt at reconciliation was a reminder of the past. but it didn't define our future. Grace and I were moving forward, step by step, into a life that was brighter and stronger than anything I could have imagined. Amelia had been a part of my story. But now I was the one writing the next chapter, and I wasn't looking back.